Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Atomic Mass Transmissions Live. I'm Director of Product Development, Will Schick, and today we're going to be painting the one and only Iden Versio from Battlefront 2. That's the number 2, not the Roman numeral 2. It's very important. There were a lot of Battlefront games. They were all very fun. So this is going to be from Today the Rebellion Dies, Squad Pack, Iden Versio. We're going to dive right in, and we're not going to do anything too crazy. We're just going to wind up doing a lot of black, and then we'll mess with the skin tone a little bit. I think I'm actually going to start with the skin tone just to knock this out pretty quick. I'm going to bring this down. Boop. Hopefully that makes it brighter and better. So let's just get in here. And I chose the non-helmeted version option just to challenge myself so that I'd have to paint the face. I heavily considered this morning. Got a little fuzzy there. Can I get it off with this brush? Boop. I did really have a moment this morning where I considered, I'll pluck it off later, it's fine. Goodbye. I did consider this morning just doing the helmeted version so that I wouldn't have to do the face, because I don't love painting faces if I can avoid it. Plus helmets are just cooler.
Do you want me to go get some tweezers for you?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Unless it looks really bad on camera, I'll get it later.
It's just like on her bun, but...
So it's just like where
just like
fuzz
where
would
hair
be.
goes?
Yeah. It's just where the hair would be anyway. So it works out fine.
Do you tend to choose helmeted versions over unhelmeted most of the time?
Every time.
Every time?
What fool's going to go into battle without a helmet on? I mean, that's just suicide.
Listen, sometimes you need a glam squad on the battlefield.
Never. Not once. Not ever. If we're going to battle, if we're riding into battle, I'm wearing my helmet. Nothing frustrates me more than in like movies or whatever, when the battle starts and the person's like, they're all in their war gear and helmet on, and then the second any kind of like loud noise or some kind of like hard hit happens,
Then they take the helmet
they immediately take the helmet off.
What was that?
And there's this whole like slow-mo spin around nonsense where they have no helmet on, and I'm like, well, you're dead now. Like,
Yeah, no, I feel that. I have never really put that together in quite that way.
it drives me nuts every time. I'm like, and now it's such a trope that every time somebody like puts a helmet on, I'm in my head, I'm just like, okay, I give it 3 minutes. And this scene will happen, and the helmet will come off, and then we will never put the helmet back. We'll never speak of the helmet again.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I tend to rock a glam squad of handmaidens on the board, so I am here for makeup, hair, and refinery on the battlefield.
Yeah, but that doesn't bother me because their war gear doesn't include a helmet.
Yeah.
Right? It's when you get in there and you're all like, well, my war gear absolutely includes a badass helmet, but I refuse to wear it because I'm an idiot. Like, come on.
Elle also points out the trope of like they take off their helmet and their hair is perfect, which has never been a thing.
Well, that's just Imperial helmet technology,
They
I
are
don't-
obsessed with order,
I
so
don't-
maybe that includes an orderly coiffure.
Oh, 100%. I don't know if anybody else has ever done this weird rabbit hole dive, but I got really lost one week into the military, like how I do my hair in the Marines. And it talked about how like all the service women would do their hair because the regulations are super tight and nothing can be out of place. The amount of hair gel buckets those poor ladies go through. So honestly, if they're even half, if Imperial Special Forces are even half as meticulous as our Marine Corps folks are, that hair ain't moving. It ain't moving for forever. It'll never move.
It's like the same gel that swimmers use, like synchronized swimmers.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It goes nowhere.
I'm weirdly on that side of TikTok. I can't explain it.
On the synchronized swimmer?
Yeah, but then it led me to marine women doing their hair. Because it's
Hmm.
the algorithm. It took me there. I can't explain it.
I mean, the internet's a wild and wonderful place. It
It's a
pulls
dark
you in
river.
strange directions from time to time, for sure. So, I don't know. To me, like, perfect hair, kind of believable just based on what I've seen people have to do to meet normal, like, military regulations for their hair. Back to this color here. Messed up. A little bit brighter here. No, quite. Oh, sorry. Does the helmeted version have tubes of the chest box? I don't believe that it does. I think it's just the helmet without the tubes. So, because the way in which the tubes would have had to connected to the chest box, especially with the pose, caused, as I recall, they caused some issues with the assembly and stuff. So we just decided that she's not using the rebreather, on world. So the tubes probably went away. But it is a neat. It is a very neat aspect of the Legion one, is that it does have that extra detail because of the way the mini was posed and everything. It kind of works out that way. I'm pretty happy with that. I dropped my brush. Any challenges when designing? I mean, from the miniature sculpting standpoint, she was pretty straightforward. So there really weren't too many engineering or sculpting challenges. I think the biggest one was just trying to figure out how to do her ID10 droid, up here, because we knew we wanted to ideally have that reference in some way, but the question always becomes, well, how are you going to do that? We prefer to try to avoid anything that involves a flight stand, and of course with Shatterpoint, unlike in Legion where it's a counterpart miniature, and so you have this whole separate base for the little droid to be on. In Shatterpoint, we had explored the idea of having little sidekick characters, but it didn't really function well within the way the game played and how objective scoring and all of that stuff works. So we had abandoned that, concept just from a gameplay perspective and balance perspective. So we knew if we were going to do ID10, it had to be on Iden's base as well in some way. So, you know, the big thing was just like, well, how are you going to get him to connect in a way that it feels like he's naturally flying, you know, over a shoulder, but in three-dimensional space. You know, the part has to connect somewhere and be grounded to the ground. And so there's a bit of discussion about how to pull off the floaty droid effect in a way that didn't require a whole lot of parts, or, you know, didn't look weird in the final kind of build and everything. And I where the sculptors and engineering team under Marco and Evan kind of got to on this character, I think worked really well. And one of the nice things about it is so you see his foot connection is like right here, right? That actually allows, the way that foot is placed, it actually allows a really thick key to go into her back armor. So it is a really stable and easy connection point. And then ID himself is just 2 parts. So he's basically cut in half to allow for all the pulling and stuff that we needed. So that was probably the biggest, you know, challenge from a how do we make this work in miniature standpoint. But overall, you know, any of these kind of, and then it's just how are you going to make a character that stands out somewhat as a leader, that has a blaster rifle, especially when she has her helmet on. It's, you know, she's not glam squatted up, so it's a little more difficult to figure out who's who. So we play with poses and we talk about, you know, trying not to do every single leader with a leaderly like command pose or a point pose. And we played with the special forces idea that they communicate through hand signals. So it's a pretty classic overall, you know, hold motion, but it does look really nice in the squad and on the tabletop and stuff. But, you know, otherwise, again, one of the nice things about characters like this is that they usually don't surprise you in a lot of ways. You kind of just know what to expect from a sculpting and design and engineering standpoint. And then from the rules design standpoint, I don't think anything really surprised us, but it was fun to, you know, integrate ideas for her customizable blaster, because that's a big kind of point in the game, is swapping out your different, you know, weapon choices to fit the situation. So do you want the high velocity blaster? Do you want the more precise blaster? Do you want something that can take down, you know, heavier targets? And obviously with the double-sided stance cards in Shatterpoint, we could play with 2 of those ideas, or kind of mix and match a couple of different thoughts to make her feel versatile, like she's swapping between the different weapon loadouts and styles. So that was fun to kind of get to mess with. I mean, who doesn't want a cargo ship to toot their horn? That's like the best. There's no way to get a rise out of a, you know, a big old car trip worth of people than to get some passing semi-truck to honk the horn with the little motion. Everyone in the car loses it. They're like, oh, you did it. Oh, it's amazing. Woo! It's just a horn, but we love it. Mix up a little brown black for her hair. So again, when did we talk about this? With last week, actually. I think we talked about tonal blacks and how important it is to think about all the different actual colors of black beyond black. And because we're painting our Iden here in classic Imperial colors, this is going to be one of those moments where we're really going to have to think about, okay, we got black hair, we got a black metal droid, we got black armor and a black flight suit. How we're going to make sure that all of those blacks are visually interesting and stand out, and we wind up with a finished product that is exciting but also looks, black. And so the way that we're going to kind of manage that is through all of our tonal blacks here. And so I'm starting with a brown black for the hair, because most black hair usually has a hint of brown to it if it's natural. So what we're going to do is we're just really going to lay in this really dark black, because it has these brown shades to it, this brown undertone. It'll read kind of more organic than the armor will, and the armor will do a turquoisey blue, and the cloth will probably do more of a flat gray, because really Empire black is a pretty rough black overall. And you could do the hair blue and all of that stuff. Yeah, it is very glossy. That'll mute out as we go here. How many hours of game time in Battlefront 2 used as research? Not enough, honestly. We should have really maximized our opportunities with that a bit more. But as I already played the game quite a bit, and we had a couple of fans of the game internally, we should have been like, oh, we got to go back and refresh our memories. We got to play some matches and stuff. But realistically, we didn't do that. So that was our mistake. We should have been better. Our research days usually revolve around folks like heading out and watching the latest episode, or doing some episode arcs, or having it on in the background while we work. There's a lot of that. It's a lot of, I'm working on X, Y, or Z character, so I'll turn on whatever series or whatever movie they're in, and kind of have it on in the background as I work on other things. And I know Plumber does something similar. And then it just kind of like permeates your subconscious. And when that character starts to talk or has a big moment, you kind of zone back in and you listen and you pay attention to what's going on, and you kind of remember or call out in your head. You're like, oh yeah, that was really good. I should write that down, or I should take that quote. Or sometimes you remember a moment and you think about, you start talking about a character and you say, okay, what were the things that I remember about this character? With our Iden here, it was, we only really see her as an Imperial in a few levels of the game before she converts. You got her, when she's in the introduction, when she gets captured, quote unquote, by the rebellion, and then she does the big data purge and escape, and we see her ruthless nature and kind of her Imperial efficiency and stuff. Then you have the Endor, moment, and then the big Operation Cinder leads her to break away from her father and the Empire. And so those were the ones that we really focused on and played with for the most part, or talked about the most part when we were looking at this. The Endor scene, I think, specifically was the one that, by and large, in my head, as we were working on her and doing the designs and stuff, that was the one that really was always at the forefront of my mind, because she was done with the same group of characters, right alongside the Ewoks and everything. She was really smack dab in the middle of our Return of the Jedi Endor stuff. And so thematically, that was the Iden I really hoped we would get across on the table. And the Inferno Squad in general, all of it comes back to that kind of moment. And I would love at some point in the future, and as we always talk about, one of the cool things about working on a character-centric game is you get those opportunities to go back and see characters at different points in their journey, and I think it would be really fun to be able to go back to this character at some point and do the rebellion version, whether that's the older and wiser version, or if it's just the kind of the midpoint Iden where she's working with Lando, and they're having their little escapade on the Imperial factory world and stuff. Doing an Iden and Lando team up could be pretty cool, I think, in the game. I really liked that whole mission. It was very fun. Was anything pulled from the book to inspire any of the miniature? No. I be honest with you, I've not read the novel, so I probably need to catch up on that. I know I believe our head of studio, Simone Elliott's read it, and I know a couple other folks in the studio have read it. So some of that input was taken in, but the events were a little too early, I guess. There's a lot of really great development that I know that happens in that novel that sets up the whole narrative push for Battlefront 2. But again, from my standpoint, I was kind of hyper focused on the Endor timeline stuff, because that was really where we were working, and we chose. Not only did we choose to kind of put Iden into the game right alongside that stuff, because she's obviously I think a great and recognizable character at this point. But it also gave us a really strong secondary option for the Imperials, because one of the struggles with trying to kind of find cool opportunities for thematic pairings, right? We always look at things both, and we've talked about this before. We always look at everything within the context of, how does it fit within canon, and also how does it fit within player choice. And one of the big things is you want to make sure that any kind of group of releases or big release event, we're doing Endor, okay, great. We have Ewoks, that's awesome. We love Ewoks. But then the question becomes, okay, well, how does a person who wants to somewhat reenact their own version of the Battle of Endor, who are they taking, and what can they use? And in a case like Legion, right, where you have the opportunity to have big vehicles and ATSTs and legions of troops, and you can do a Major Marquand in his ATST and stuff, that becomes a lot simpler, or a lot more straightforward. With a game like Shatterpoint that's very character-centric, the Imperials don't have a lot of really great. There are characters there are officers there, obviously, that you can look at, but they're not quite at that level of heroics. And I use heroics not to mean like good heroes, but major, massive characters, right? There's just not that many good options and opportunities there. And Iden was one of those that, because of the narrative that was added to those things in the game and everything else, we had our kind of answer, our who in the heck can we use for this that makes sense, that allows players to kind of live out a recreation of the Battle of Endor. So it also kind of became one of the biggest kind of touchstones for Inferno Squad, and the character was looking heavily at, all right, these are the characters that we expect most players will wind up, at least in the short term, until more options or different characters come to the game and stuff. This is kind of how people are going to be able to reenact their Battle of Endor fantasies, their dreams, their what-ifs, in a way that kind of lines up with the continuity and the canon itself. So, there you go. So I kind of missed out on the novel and during the work on this character. But I've heard nothing but good things. And honestly, once people started talking about it, I kind of kicked myself a little bit. I was like, I should have really looked at that, to be honest. I wasn't hyper aware of its existence. But then the more people talked about it, I was like, oh, that would have been maybe really interesting to see what it would have added, if anything, to our final kind of analysis here. Okay. So now, let's see. So as far as like the question about updates and balance stuff and yada yada, I mean we're always internally talking about the games and if they need adjustments and where those adjustments may need to be, and we're pretty watchful and I think vigilant about making sure that the games and the play and everything fit within our imperfectly balanced balance. But as we've talked about in like all cases, it was 2 years until we did a rebalance for Crisis Protocol. Shatterpoint is coming up on just a year here in July. I want to say it was July when it released, but maybe it was June. It was one of those J months. And we really haven't.
It was June.
Was it June? Okay, that's what I feel like, but difficult for me to remember. And one of the things you have to remember too is that we haven't even gotten to the point that we've released everything that was initially tested in that first batch. So there are missing pieces of the puzzle and things that, we have yet to see how they'll impact or change the way that people are analyzing or looking at the things that are currently in the game. For instance, and we are just about to hit the 3rd mission pack, which is going to be a really big, momentous kind of occasion for the game, and it fleshes out what, all of our testing was looking at in terms of the full mission environment, at least for the launch of the game, and how those will impact different, list building choices. We're going to get to see how players utilize their different options and opportunities with those 3 packs, and how do the matchups and the squad construction work, knowing that you have to kind of account for these different things. And none of it is, as we've talked about, right? None of the mission packs are a massive shakeup. They're not designed to be a huge, shocking revelation or earth-shattering change, but they do ask different questions. They do all largely favor specific squad builds. So you can build directly around a mission pack and try to maximize character abilities and synergies and stuff, which was all part of the intention, and that's what gives some additional meaning to which mission pack you're going to decide to use when you're creating your strike team. All that to say, it's still from our standpoint, it's still very, very early to be talking about or looking at making significant balance adjustments in the game, because we still haven't really seen the culmination of all the things that were tested around and balanced around for the game itself. And that was true, it was also very true of Crisis Protocol. We say a lot of the same stuff when we talk about Legion, and we get asked, when is the next adjustment coming? When can we expect any kind of changes or things like that? And the answer is typically always going to be, well, later than you probably would desire if you're asking the question, to be fair. But that's because every change has a remarkable and dramatic effect on everything. It's not just you fix one thing and that thing's fixed. It's an entire living, breathing ecosystem of stuff, and all of it plays off of each other, right? Think about all those non-indigenous species and the problems they cause once they're unleashed in an ecosystem that's not prepared for them or not designed around them. It's not that much different with game rules in systems or games like this, right? If you suddenly unleash a unexpected apex predator that has no counters, no natural counters to it, you can really upset the overall balance and health of everything. Yeah. Well, be wary that you don't create a bigger monster when trying to defeat a monster. It's classic. Those classic warnings. So we see so often in horror literature and science fiction and things like that, right? They're relatable tropes because they're fairly true. So again, I would love to say that, the game is perfect and no adjustments will ever be necessary, but the reality of the situation is that's never true, because just to start, we're starting with an imperfectly balanced system, and therefore we kind of have to assume that at some point we'll have to come in and do a little gardening, a little tending to everything. But I don't think, we're going to see that this year for sure, because we're still not to a point to where we can be making smart and good decisions, because we haven't seen the effect of everything yet. Yeah, so our kind of mission statement, the way in which we view game development and design and everything else, is that, these games are imperfectly balanced because we want characters to have unique feel, and we want them to have unique abilities, and we want the games to be interesting and to reward creativity and list building and all that. And so once you decide that your game is going to be that, no matter what the game is, you've now created a balance curve that simply means the game will never be perfectly balanced. Because in order to be perfectly balanced, everything has to be exactly the same, right? Even chess, for all of its balance, is not perfectly balanced because one player has to go first. And once you get into the level of we're trying to recreate Star Wars characters and tell all these cool stories and let them do all these neat abilities and stuff, now we're talking about a level of complication and difference that means you're never going to be perfectly balanced, because at the end of the day, mathematically, something is going to be a 2 and something is going to be a 1, right? And now the 2 is going to be superior to the 1. So you can just take nothing but 2s and you have yourself the best thing. And this is where the complexity of game design and everything else comes in, because that best thing, once you get into really complex systems, it might be the best against one thing and not the other, and now you're talking about rock, paper, scissors, and how that impacts stuff. And then you have additional complexity from the fact that these games are objective-based, and so the missions, the board layouts, all of these different things, where you put your terrain can have a huge impact. How much terrain can have a huge impact, If all the objectives are on a higher elevation, but your strike team doesn't have any climbers or jumpers, you're going to have a much harder time trying to take those objectives and succeed at the game than somebody who took, characters that have nothing but jumps and all this other stuff, right? So all these things have an impact, and it means that the game can never be perfectly balanced. So what we aim for instead is imperfectly balanced within a specified range. And so if you imagine that everything's on a bell curve, right? You have your your things that are at the bottom of the bell curve on the left and the things that are at the top of the bell curve on the right. Now what our goal is to make sure that that bell curve always exists, but it's those edges, those outliers, the weakest and the strongest thing, are as absolutely close as they possibly can be to each other. And that means that the power differential between the two things, even though one is clearly mathematically or statistically better than the other, is less impactful because player skill, which is a huge X factor, things that you can't account for, like terrain density and dice luck and everything else, those things become meaningful and impactful in a way that kind of closes the power curve for you. So, whereas if the curve was super far apart, those little aspects, those things you can't necessarily account for, or you can't mathematically balance for, might not mean anything, right? In a big curve where the curve is really wide between best thing and worst thing, if that's a mile-long gap, then player skill, luck, everything else has to make up for a mile. That's a lot. It's a lot of distance to make up for, right? But if your gap between the strongest and the weakest is a foot, player skill, luck, everything else now only has to go 1 foot of distance before it closes the gap. So that's what we look for. We try to keep everything within a specific power grade and power curve. And when we see things that break the outliers of the power grade or that curve in ways that we feel go further apart than what we want, that's when we dive in and, we'll make adjustments and stuff like that. Oop. When you're looking at adjusting characters, do you look at ability cost and how it would weaken, overpower certain characters? Do everything about going further in Lawrence? This person was strong with force, so force cost should be X versus Y. The cost of a power is absolutely a tuning mechanism and something that we can play with and do. The overall effect of the ability can be something we play with, right? The force value that they bring to the overall group is another way to do stuff. So there's a ton of ways that we can go in and really affect balance, and we like to take holistic views every time. One of the biggest things that we're always looking at, though, is how do we maintain the character's identity? That's one of the most important parts of the whole thing, is that you want to make sure that the character feels like the character. So if a character is supposed to be really strong with the force, we're probably going to try to avoid as much as possible making any change or balance adjustment that's going to make them feel like they're weak with the force. So, for example, costing an ability like a force jump more just because they have more force. Well, that's weird, because why is the force not speaking through this person into this person with the same effect as it does to so many others who are not as important or not as valuable to the force, right? Not as important to its dealings and its going-ons. So we might look at, maybe we need to create a different ability, or maybe we need to look at something else in the kit. And there's always so many different options and ways to go about that in Shatterpoint, between the stances and defense expertise and, abilities, health, all these different things. So there's a lot of dials to turn. We don't necessarily just look at one. And even when you wind up in a situation where, all of your player feedback and data points are saying X, Y, or Z on this character is too good, if that ability is really core to their identity or core to their play pattern and style, you may not affect that ability, you might affect something else around it, right? Because the aggregate, the sum of all of the abilities, is what really matters outside of a game-breaking ability. If an ability just simply breaks the boundaries of the game, you can't do anything but rewrite it. But sometimes, you'll have people be like, well, this is the problem. This is clearly the problem. This thing right here, it's the problem. You say, well, yeah, okay, that's the thing that is noticeable, but is it the thing that's actually pushing them over the edge? And sometimes it's other things. Sometimes it's simply number of attack dice, number of health, the interaction with a different ability, things like that. So it's never as cut and dry as it may seem at first blush. And that's part of the reason why, testing is so important and identifying what is actually the root of the problem or how to adjust it in a way that doesn't, overly nerf or break the character or the experience in a way that is detrimental to everyone in the game, or detrimental to a player's experience is so important. And again, it's kind of like when you go to the doctor and you say, I have a cough. What you don't want them to do is be like, well, your lungs are the problem, so we'll just take those out and you'll be fine. No more cough, right? You want them to look at you holistically and to understand how everything functions within your body so that they can identify the cause and then treat it appropriately. And it's no different when you're talking about game design and balance or, trying to maintain a healthy garden or an environment or anything like that. It's always going to come down to, okay, well, you're working with an entire functioning system. It's not just one thing, and that one thing doesn't just do one thing, it does all these other things because it comes back to and it impacts and has effects on all of this stuff that you may not think about, or it may not even, kind of come to your mind that, oh, this matters too. This is part of this. This is how this interacts with that. And you need to look no further again than like how we kind of, as humans, can screw up the environment or screw up ecosystems so easily by introducing something that seems innocuous, but in reality has this huge ripple effect on everything around it because of how delicate balance really is and how hard it can be, to really maintain and keep and reach that kind of homeostasis. So I know, our development manager, Will Pagani, he will say every time you should change nothing if nothing needs changing, even if we've decided like, oh, wouldn't it be better if we did X, Y, or Z, right? He's always our gut check. He will always be the first person to come in and say, yeah, but what if we don't change it? Because we're always opening ourselves up to this risk that we're going to break something unknowingly by fixing something else. And that's important. Those are important conversations to have. And sometimes it leads to us saying, okay, well, maybe we won't do this even though we think it would be really cool, or we would love to see. We wish we had done it this way, but we just can't be 100% sure that the consequences won't outstrip the value that we would get from doing it. Or sometimes it makes us like reevaluate and look at stuff and come back with the conclusion that yes, this is the way, this thing that we want to do is good and healthy and fine, and it won't cause, an outward kind of problem to anything. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I want to go back in and highlight up this here. So I guess I'll just use a little bit of this brown. Go back to my brown black. Maybe grab not much, just a little bit. There we go. All hail the great Mahi Mahi. Dallas has got it. Homeostasis. Zuckuss and Forlom would be really cool. I've always appreciated how weird those characters are and their like crazy little backstory and stuff. I honestly had no idea who those characters were until I started playing the Decipher card game way back in the day. And that game introduced me to so much of the weird esoteric Star Wars characters and lore, because they had all that stuff, and then they had the little like detail boxes about it at the top of the card where it give you a little background and knowledge on it of what the heck it was. So that was how I got introduced to those two. The two bounty hunters hang out together, do a lot of stuff. And I always kind of enjoyed them because I just thought they were so goofy. At least looking. I know they're serious boys in the story and stuff, but that was my initial takeaway. I was just like, oh, those guys actually do have names and a thing, having only seen them on the Super Star Destroyer bridge like once, and then you never see them again. All right, well, we're gonna get kind of close here. Put in a little bit of that like specular hair highlighting here. Just around the crown of the head where the light would be zinging off. Get a little bit on the bun. Not much. Just a little bit. All right, let's see. What else do we want to try to accomplish on this Iden before we go? Let's go ahead and sneak in here. Do the blaster really quick. Mix up a little bit of a blue-black. Glaze this one on. So glaze some color onto the blaster, and then allow us to go back in and we can darken it up and stuff after it dries with some black wash. Maybe we'll just do the same thing to little ID10 here. And then by the time we're done, we'll just kind of leave the lenses and the glows and all the fun detail work. Kind of mash up. So this, again, just kind of laying in a little bit of color to work with later. This little glaze plays off of that zenith highlight and gives us some undertones so that when we come back in with either our black wash or maybe our metals or whatever color we want, we can kind of mix and match and play with it. So for example, like on the blaster, we can just come in and start hitting a light glaze on the bottom here and mix stuff together. And you can kind of see on the hill, on the stock, how those colors start to work together to create an overall effect that we want. But you do have to kind of wait for that to, now we're just wet blending. Wait for that to dry and you'll get different effects obviously as well because you can just color over it. But you could go in and if you really felt ambitious, you could just start wet blending everything. Get a little bit of a anime style cell shade effect. If you play with these colors right, going from dark to really bright and highlighted. And you can even go in and do things like erase your color. All right. Well, I think with that, yeah, as far as picking characters in different groups of the game, you know, we want to hit all of the really key and iconic characters. We also want to show some deeper, like, fun narrative cuts into the lore as well. So it's been a blast to be able to work on Night Sisters and Handmaidens and things that you wouldn't normally see in a, you know, a more battle-focused or larger scale Star Wars game, and give everything a moment to shine, and also give players a chance to express their creativity and do stuff. All right, so this is where we're going to stop on our Iden because we're almost done with our 1 hour together. But overall, we made some really great progress on it. Hopefully you can see how all those different chromatic blacks are coming through between the brown in the hair, the more turquoisey blue we did on the armor with the sharper edge highlights, and then the smoother blending that we did with our blue-black for the flight suit and the boots and everything else, all that organic material versus the armor material. And there are ways to go back in and really amp up the armor. We could do like a gloss varnish to give it some shine. We could, you know, affect some highlights and stuff. There's a couple different options there. But those will all be the finishing touches before we get this character on the table. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to tune in tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific. Dallas Kemp will be painting something very cool from the Marvel Crisis Protocol line. And then otherwise, I will see you here next Tuesday for some more fun hobby and hanging out action. Till then, I've been Will. You've been great. We'll see you on the next one. Goodbye. Yeah, I said it that way. Don't laugh at me.